Namaste and welcome to Itihasdhir with me, Aditi Joshi, and my co-host Aditya Saraf. Itihasdhir is a platform which is dedicated to preserving culture, civilization, and philosophical legacy of Bharat. And today we are joined by Mr. Mahalingam Balaji, the author of the bold and penetrating book Casticide, The Roots of Hindu Extinction. In his striking work, Mr. Balaji addresses one of the most contentious issues in Indian history, which is caste. And he addresses it not merely as a historical construct, but as a present and persistent fault line that continues to fragment the Hindu society from within. As for the book, you can all get your copies from Amazon Kindle. The copies are available as well as Mr. Balaji's previous book, Brahmin Genocide, is also available on Amazon. Welcome to Itihasdhir, Mr. Balaji.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Namaste Aditi Joshi ji. Namaste Aditya Sharaf ji. And namaste to all the viewers of Itihasa channel. Please.
Balaji, I want to start by asking you a question that you coined the word casticide, which comes across not merely as a socio-political grievance, but also as a civilizational death spiral. And to what extent do you see this epistemic assault designed to delegitimize Hindu metaphysics itself and not just the Hindu society?
See, after our India's independence, I think our country went in to adopt a lot of modern Western frameworks. So when they did that, they did have some beneficial consequences for Bharat. Right? At the same time, on the negative side, what happened was that it also aggravated the problem of our indigenous identity. Right? How it happens? This was a process which started almost a few hundred years back through our geopolitical narratives. Then there is a census which came. Then there is the divide and rule policies, which we all are very famously heard of. And so these are things which we cannot readily reverse. But the first stage itself was to analyze these narratives and then question their validity. And वहाँ पे factual arguments क्या है? How is the indigenous context on this? That we could not access because we started following the modern Western framework right after independence. Right? So unless we go back and analyze these narratives and question some of the assumptions behind it and look at their validity, what happens is then we end up creating the same colonial framework again and again. Right? And hence, throughout this book on Casticide, we hope to highlight the veracity of the narratives of Bharati identity, which we all have to face on a day-to-day basis. And you asked about the metaphysics. Yes, the karma and dharma that underpin that Sanatana, it necessitates a distinct vitalizing engagement. Right? So what happens is when we use the Western framework, especially there is a chances that the misinterpretations and misunderstandings of Sanatana Dharma can get propagated. Example, what happens is, what is the basis of an argument? What is the idea of knowledge? What is the notion of fact or truth? All of these have very different connotations. In a Western framework vis-a-vis a Bharatiya framework, sometimes it can even be diametrically opposite also. Right? Hence, we need to understand how we have to adapt some of these Western frameworks, especially I think in the educational system. If I may make one last comment, what it has happened is the so-called Macaulay education system has created the student mental process into what I call as utilitarian, modernist, and economic trajectories. So they don't have access to what the ancestral knowledge of the Bharatiya was. Right? So did I answer your question?
Yes,
please go ahead.
So my question is that, in your analysis, you directly target the narrative that, caste has sort of morphed into a civilization original sin, whereby Hinduism is presumed guilty a priori, meaning that we are already guilty before the conversation even
Right.
begins, regardless of the historical complexity that we have faced or the regional diversity that we have. Uh, how would you sort of answer that? How has that, that narrative sort of become an original sin for Hinduism today? That, Hinduism was born with these caste lines and this divide.
That's a good question. I think the phrase caste system has now become almost like an important marker phrase for identification of India, especially for Hindus. Right? And this phrase caste system has become so ubiquitous that most Hindus accept it as a fact that such a system existed. They accept it as a fact. Not, it was there. It is continuing to exist. It is discriminatory. It is unique to Hindus, and it must be eradicated. A narrative set कर दिया, right? So this is how the whole narrative is, and as you rightly said, it is a priori. It is almost like a default assumption, right? And in fact, there is one work which has very interesting work in this genre is from Professor Nicholas Dirks. You might have heard of this book called Castes of Mind. He even opens that book with a sentence which says, when thinking of India, it is hard not to think of caste. Right? In comparative sociology, in common parlance, caste has become a central symbol for India, indexing it in a fundamentally different from other places. Like throughout the world, right? ऐसा नहीं था इन ये अलग चीज है. It is only happened in India, right? That is how the narrative has been set. In fact, there is a newspaper report where Professor Ramachandra Guha, right, you might have heard of him, right, a historian, he is supposed to have stated this, that caste system is the most rigorous, most diabolical system of social stratification ever invented by humans. And we Hindus invented it. So this, I am possibly right, Ishwara Kripa, maybe after a week or two, I would like to engage with Professor Ramchandra Goga to understand itna diabolical, rigorous system, how did we invent it, right? So when I did the research, I couldn't find it, right? So maybe we will have to have a chacha with him and then understand his perspective there. So that's why, yes, you are right that it becomes a default narrative about Bharat, especially of the Hindus. Yes,
So,
please.
Balaji, the term caste is rooted in Portuguese and Latin etymology. So, why do you argue that even engaging with this category on its own terms is a civilizational concession? And is a complete epistemic break with Western terminology really necessary?
And that's interesting question. First of all, why must we even use an alien term? Right? Because we talk about make in India, Atmanirbhar Bharat, right? We were talking about self-sufficiency, everything. हमारा civilizational narrative के लिए हम क्यों alien term को we have to use? That is the first question. Right? Leave that rhetoric question, right? That maybe you can say it's a rhetoric. Secondly, there is also some context to the use of such words in other civilizations. Right? For example, there is a Spanish phrase you might have heard of called limpeza de sangre. Right? The limpeza de sangre word, it stands for purity of blood. This is a Spanish word which traveled from Spain to the Americas, and then the concept of blood purity was used there in the lot what they call as a medieval Castile. Right? That's what they call it. Right? It evolved into a hierarchical system there, right? Because there they, I think the Spanish, indigenous, and African descent, right? Then they called it as Siesma di Casta, right? You might be all be aware, right? That is what is the original caste system was. So without we having a proper understanding of how this the whole thing evolved and how they have used it and what has been the cultural context behind it, it is like we may end up misinterpreting or even kind of misusing those civilizational words by trying to use those alien words, right? Just to give you a small example, right? In I suppose you both live in Delhi, right? So if you live in Delhi and then if you go to Jaipur or maybe to Madhya Pradesh, there is a lot of local slang and context to certain words they use, right? Maybe they use the same Hindi, right? But there are contexts may be slightly different, right? So unless we understand the origin of the civilizational origin there or the local cultural context, right? Even within the same civilization, the word usage slightly changes, right? Practices slightly change. So why we try to use the alien word to describe our culture? That's the point there. Please go ahead.
So we've heard again and again, in terms of the Indian context, we have, of course, jatis and we have our varna. And when we hear about the British, of course, we have the caste and the tribe system that they have sort of imposed or rigorously tried to mend our system into their system. Could you explain to us how, via codification of caste and via census and administration policies, the codification was not just bureaucratic but strategic and like controlling? They essentially classified us in order to control us, and how that sort of played out, because it's very different from what we see in African colonies, where we see that religion instead of caste was used to control us.
See, I think I would again go back to Nicholas Dirks, right? I think he kind of summarized in a very beautiful way. He said British colonialism played actually a critical role in both identification, right, and also the production of Indian tradition. Because what happened was sometimes they actually, in fact, I think it's Bernard Cohen who said that, right? He argued that British simultaneously misrecognized. So they misrecognized first, and then they also simplified things Indian, right? And then they imprisoned the Indian subject. Once they did it, right, they said, okay, this is the typecast role, right? And you have to perform as per the role. Right? So they kind of looked at the complex system, they simplified it to their understanding, and now the Indian subject is expected to behave as per this. It's like what they say, right? The shoe has been made. Now the feet has to be kind of adjusted to fit into the shoe. Right? So in the conceptual scheme in which the British created to understand the India, they followed the same logic. They reduced very complex concepts and their associated meanings to a few small, easily identifiable, what they call as metonyms. Right? So this actually even Professor G.S. Gurye, right? You might have heard of him, a doyen of a veteran, very eminent sociologist, right, of India. He in fact quotes that he laments the growth of caste sabhas. Interestingly, he says the caste sabhas have all come up. They organized around the, what was their claim for the caste sabhas that time? They wanted to press forward claims of higher status in the census. So in current context, will any caste sabha come forward and say we want to go into the higher status in the census? Right? It's a bit, we have to think about it, right? In our real life, we ho jayega. Right now, we'll see. Right now, the caste census is going to happen Ishwara Kripa, right? Next year, right? We will see how the behavior is. He also quotes with approval the remarks of Mr. Middleton. Mr. Middleton was one of the census superintendents. Right? He himself says that the occupational castes have been largely manufactured and almost entirely preserved as separate castes by the British government. So they created some of these labels themselves. And Gurye was perhaps, I think in Nicholas Dirks also points out that he was one of the first scholars to suggest that politicization of caste was not merely a natural outgrowth of the traditional institution, but it's a conscious design of British colonial policy. So going back to your word about, right, how they used the divide and rule, they pretty much used that. So after the 1857 rebellion, they pretty much, it was clear to the British that the safety of the dominion in India is closely related to keeping the Indian people divided on the lines of either religion or caste or any other fault line that they can invent. In fact, I think there is a person called James Kerr, I think, who they have quoted. He says that caste is opposed to national union, and he argues more specifically that a policy of divide and rule on caste influenced the policy and conduct of British officials. Right? All these are documented there in Nicholas Berg's books also. So you mentioned about Africa. In Africa, they think the conflict was also between different ethnic groups. They created fault lines among different ethnic groups. I think the classic example, I think all of us know, is the Hutu and the Tutsi, which happened unfortunately in Rwanda. It led into a genocide there. And so there also the colonial fault lines which were created, it played a major role in the future problems which the country faced. Let me pause here. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Uh, we often hear, like when someone wants to criticize Hinduism or shame the whole setup, they'll just start by saying, "Oh, you know what the Manusmriti says this, or the Manusmriti says that," and it has become a sort of a standard critique when it comes to saying anything against Hindus. So, how do you address the selective weaponization of the Dharma Shastra text, especially outside the bounds of a cultural context or a scriptural authority?
Before that, let me check with you. Now we've gone through a few questions. So, is my answers longer, or would you like them to be shorter, or can we just go ahead the same way?
Go
You
ahead,
can go
the
ahead
same
and
way, sir.
finish.
Thank you. So, coming to your question, Ji, I think the Manusmriti, I have said this in a few interviews before also, right? Uh, the Manusmriti says, Ashtapadram tu Shudrasya, Steye Bhavati Kilpisham, Shodashaivastu Vaishyasya, Dvatrimsad Shastriyasya, Brahmanasya Chadursashtihi Purnam Vavi Shatam Bhavet. And so, what it says is, when the case of a threat, a theft, a Shudra is entitled for 8 times of the punishment, whereas a Vaishya is entitled for 16, and a Kshatriya 32, and a Brahmin, depending on it, it is from 64 to 100 times. Right? So there was different treatments for the crime, because, and the answer also says is because they know the dosha guna vidyahi, right? They know what is right and what is wrong. So then the person is supposed to set an example, right? So that is what they say. And if you look at, this is just Manusmriti, right? But if you look at Katyayana Dharma Shastra and if you look at Vyasa Dharma Shastra, it says it's for all crimes. Right? So these things are never mentioned about the Manusmriti. Right? And Dr. P.V. Kane, right, and he's written extensive Mahabhavatyaya by P.V. Kaneji, right? He has written and he has analyzed and he says that the only special claim for the privilege, because the word privilege itself was brought by the British. Right? Before that, it was not. Right? So this privilege in the courts was that capital punishment was not supposed to be given, and the corporal punishment like whipping. Right? But even in some cases, he said that has also happened. Okay. Otherwise, all the Brahmanas were subjected to branding, being paraded on the back of the back of an donkey, fines. And in fact, I think I also mentioned in another places that there were what we call as patita gramas, patitya gramas. Right? These gramas were for what we call as the Brahmins who have fallen to, who have gone into fallen status, who couldn't hold live by the norms of the society. So the society actually excommunicated them. Right? So all these things are there. But actually, the British, when they came here, they had, I think, what they call as a criminal procedure code before the IPC came. Right? In that, there is a section 443. Right? The section 443, what it said was, I think, if I remember correct, they cannot be tried by an Indian magistrate. A British person cannot be tried by an Indian magistrate, however senior, however experienced. And even if there is something called sessions court, right? After that, the sessions judge also himself may be a European, but he cannot sentence a European British subject to not more than 1 year. These are the kind of privileges that they gave to themselves. Okay? And they looted our country, and then millions of deaths happened. But then somehow they start talking about these Manusmritis and others as if these things had existed for thousands of years. And this is another thing which we have to keep in mind, that many of these things are written as if the Hindus were in a kind of a vacuum chamber, right? The invasions were happening, millions of people were becoming slaves, getting killed. The economic ruin of the country was happening, but then Hindus were very busy keeping themselves isolated, and then they were focusing only on the caste system. Right? That is how what I call as the narrative, because Hindus are in a timeless dimension, they are frozen. right? And then the Hindu of today behaves exactly like how it was 2000 years back, and that is how James Mill's colonial uh, era was, right? And his writings are, and they are continuing even today. Sorry, perhaps that was a long answer to a short question.
Not at all, sir. So, continuing with something that you said, which leaves us with a sense of history. I mean, this debate is not really a new one if we look at it. I mean, referring to something like the Yaksha Prashna in one par in the Mahabharata, perhaps. Uh, this has gone on for a long time, and so I ask you a two-part question essentially. Firstly, does your thesis concede that casteism as a social phenomenon existed historically, but then also argue that it was civilizationally peripheral instead of being foundational? And my second question drawn to this is, if yes, then where do you draw the line between tradition and the abuse of tradition, essentially?
Interesting. If I may ask you a clarification question here, what is the definition of casteism?
Uh,
What do you mean
I
by that?
mean,
Right.
so casteism, as in looking at it from the modern perspective, perhaps from the British lens, so to say, would mean something that has to do with the solidification of the Varna system, or perhaps more than that, right? Into this hierarchy of privilege, so to say. Uh, of course, looking back at our history, we've had a very system when a very a system that has not compartmentalized us, perhaps. It has allowed us our freedom, so to say, to purna karma vibhagisha, uh, that it preaches. So with that perspective, I ask you this question.
Thank you, Ji. I think you clarified it very well. Thank you for that. Right. So when the word casteism also in many places they use it as it is an adherence to a caste system. Right? In that context, they use it sometimes. They use it to talk about some kind of a prejudice, right, or those kind of words. Right? But to me, the word casteism itself it's again caste itself is an alien term. So why do we bring caste? It's a word. Then why do we bring its sister word, brother word, and all into our vocabulary? Right? वो नहीं होना चाहिए. Right? उसमें ऊपर चर्चा भी नहीं होना चाहिए. Right? And in fact, you mentioned about the hierarchy, right? In fact, maybe we can. I use this opportunity to tell your viewers also. Last 1 year, I have been asking in multiple forums for people to prove that the Purusha Sukta verse, which they keep quoting, is the hierarchical verse. Right? And in fact, it has gone to such an extent that now recently I have announced a price of 50,000 rupees for anybody who can come and prove that to us. Right? So please, I request your viewers also to propagate the message. So far, nobody has come and claimed it. Right? So this is the fake narrative again, in my opinion, and we need to challenge these kind of narratives. So coming back, there is a person called Ibbotson, if I'm not wrong. Maybe I'm not pronouncing it right. Ibbotson, I think his name is. He says that first they did the Varna system on the census for two attempts I think they did. Then he became the central provinces. I think in Punjab he became the census commissioner that time. Right? He says caste looks like more like a social construct. Right? It is not a religious institution because somebody changes the religion also. Caste seems to be unaffected. Right? Then he says there are Brahmanas who are looked upon as outcasts by those who, under the fourfold classification, would be classified as Shudras. So some Shudra community was also looking at some Brahmanas as outcasts. And this is something which a Britisher has documented. And he says, and I think this is the best example, nothing could be more variable and difficult to define than caste. And this is the census commissioner. Okay. He says, a fact that a generation descended from an ancestor of any given caste, it creates you a presumption that, okay, that the generation is also of the same caste. But that presumption is liable to be defeated by infinite variety of circumstances. Because some person, he or she was had her parents from a particular caste, it gives a presumption that they belong to that. But he says it can be infinite number of circumstances can change it, right? So I think coming back to your second question there, I think we need to have a proper definition first. As you rightly said, there has to be a proper definition and its characteristics should be agreed, because before we want to study an object, what we do, we want to first find out what is this object about, uska naam kya hai, uska definition kya hai, uska characteristic kya hai. Then we start doing more research on it, right? वहां पे वो बेसिक्स भी हमारा पास नहीं है in terms of the word called caste. So we need to have our indigenous varna jati studies first, and that should bring to light what were the good practices, and if there were any practices which were not healthy to the modern side, not suitable, that also has to be brought up about, right? So I think that is where we need to start. In my opinion, we need to do more research in these areas.
Just
Let me
one more thing. Firstly, I think you were referring to the Punjab commissioner, which was Denzil Ibbotson, something like that. Secondly, I mean, even when we talk about something like the Manusmriti, I think of what I have read of it, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Does the book itself not say that, you know, the best practices that are at that time prevalent by the best of human beings around you are what you have to abide by, essentially, and not just the law that this book or any other book sets down for you?
Yes, you bring up a very important point, Aditya ji. I think that is how our Dharma Shastras always have this word that we go by what we call as the sacred Vedas. They are the Pramana. Then the Smriti text or the Pramana. Then if you are not able to find a solution in them, or if you have doubt, then go and ask the good people in your community. Okay. So they say, please go and ask those good people in your community, people of reputation, uska check kar dijiye, right? So that is a way our ancient ancestors have created a system where our practices are contemporary, because it is not frozen in time, right? That it is something is written 3,000, 4,000 years back, maybe, for me it is timeless. The Vedas are anadi, right? There is a timeless, but a timeless text. But if you want to use it for practical applications, go and ask the elders and people who are good practitioners, people of repute. They'll give you the current context. That's what they say. And I think it's a very important point you brought up there. Absolutely correct.
So, talking about misrepresentation of certain traditions, when we refer to Brahminism, the first thing, I think we cannot disassociate the reference of Brahminism with Brahminical patriarchy. And you have referred to this mythos of Brahminical patriarchy, as a colonially birthed trope. So, what methodological flaws do you observe in the intersectional reading of one as simultaneously oppressive, immutable, and systemically total?
See, the Brahminical patriarchy word, I think I have kind of spoken about it in the previous book. I called it under the multiple referencing technique. Because there are a few ways in which the hate for Brahmin, the Brahmophobia is spread, right? The modern techniques, one of them is called the multiple referencing, or we call it circular referencing, right? Case hota hai, right? First thing is, has there ever been a matriarchal society in the human history? Yes. From what I hear from social anthropologists, it never existed. Right? So anybody can correct me if I'm wrong. There is no documented version of this, of a matriarchal society anywhere in the human history. So what is so special about this Brahminical patriarchy? Patriarchy is there in everywhere, right? There has to be something special. Then when I go deeper into this, I believe this term was supposedly coined by Professor Uma Chakrabarti in a research paper. And I think that's where the word first is supposed to have appeared. Right? Then I caught hold of the paper. That paper actually refers to an insightful essay by a person called Dr. Noor Yalman. Right? So then I said, okay, let's go and find out what Noor Yalman has written. He says that Noor Yalman's paper says that fundamental principle of a Hindu social organization is to construct a closed structure to preserve land, women, and ritual quality in India. And what he does is he actually has studied Malabar and Sri Lanka. That is what is the paper's claim. Then there is one problem with logic immediately, because what Professor Noor Alman has talked about in Sri Lanka is a singly society, and it is characterized by the absence of Brahmins in it. Okay. So now you have a situation, right? Two societies have closed structure. Let us assume. Let's go by their own research, right? They say they have two societies, singular society is there, Hindu society is there. They have constructed closed structure, preserving land, women, and ritual in it. But in one society, Brahmins is there, other society, Brahmins is nahi hai, right? So my own basic reduction logic will say that then it may not be because of Brahmins. If it is only because of Brahmins, it should have happened only in India. It has happened in Sri Lanka also, where the Brahmins are not there. Agree? Are you with me so far? Then I said, okay, he talked about Malabar. Ye kya hai Malabar mein? So then he says, he refers to another research by a professor called Professor Kathleen Go. So what does that research say? That research says that she has written about certain rituals which were supposed to have happened 200 years back. When I think it was in 1930-40 or something, she has written that paper. I'm not exactly sure, but I think somewhere before the independence. So, and she has not witnessed it. So some people have told her that it is what it is supposed to have been. So it is not even a second person account, right? It is a third person account of some ritual which is supposed to have existed. So now, based on that, and based on Sinhalese society, suddenly the term Brahminical patriarchy gets created. Right. So this is what I call as a circular referencing, right? Then finally, where is it? There is no primary source for this. So that's how all these things are happening. And finally, what happens? A CEO of a multinational company comes and holds a board called Smash Brahminical Patriarchy. Right? Then suddenly, everybody assumes that there was a Brahminical patriarchy and something needs to be smashed. Right? I don't know what needs to be smashed in.
In fact, I mean, I would go one step further to say that most of this Brahminical patriarchy hate, so to say, comes from the Dravidians in the south. And it is really interesting to note that historically, we've had matrilinear systems in India, and all of them, what I've read, have also been from the south. So
Yes.
it is very interesting to sort of note that.
You make a very interesting point here again. I'm sorry, did I interrupt you, Aditya ji?
Not at all.
Okay. So you make a very interesting point, Aditya ji, because when I studied some of these systems, the closest system which could be called into matrilineal practices actually existed in Kerala. And if you go to the history, the British have taken so much of effort to kind of demonize that actually, right? They kind of ridiculed it. They did not appreciate that society at all, right? So it's very surprising that though we had such very nice traditions, the British did not support any of them. On the contrary, their only job was to keep, okay, anything goes wrong, please blame the Brahmin, please blame the Hindu society for it.
And the war that Tipu Sultan waged against the Nayars of Malabar for the evils, as he said, of the matrilinear system. Anyhow, I'll come to my question. My question, sir, is that when you assess the role of the Indian academia and also the role of, say, the Hollywood, Western NGOs, the digital storytelling of which we sort of have big OTT platforms now that come out with series, and they manufacture a globally exportable sort of Hindu phobic caste narrative. How do you take the role of the Indian academia and these Hollywood and NGOs and all of that into sort of advancing a civilizationally suicidal caste discourse under the guise of social justice?
The way I see it is, first of all, I think these so-called predominant, I would call the dominant narrative of the day today based on two fundamental belief system. The two fundamental beliefs is nature is meant for human beings to exploit. Second is there is only one life, and a person needs to make maximum use of it. And in a way, it is almost like a Charvaki concept of materialistic. In the way maximum use of it is all happiness, everything comes from materialistic pursuit. Right? So this is the underpinning, or I call it the two foundational points of the current narrative. And this inevitably will lead to oppressor-oppressed framework, because if we have to go and grab as much as we want, then there is always going to be competition between people. Right? So it sets up, by design, it sets up oppressor and oppressed narrative. And so as much as possible, what happens is, whereas our drishti was always based on seeking. We were seeking the truth of what is birth. What is birth? Main yahan pe aa gaya. Sir, why am I here? What is going to be my next journey? How am I supposed to live in this world in peace with nature? How do I respect nature? Right? So our drishti was entirely different. This land was full of seekers, right? Seekers of truth. From throughout India, if you see all the literature of Bhakti movement and everything, it is all about, hey, life is so transient, right? We are like travelers here, right? And we just have to prepare ourselves for the next journey. And so it's in direct contrast. So, and there is a belief in karma, there is a belief in rebirth. So unless the Indian academia, they have so far imbibed only the Western framework, and they're using that to analyze the Bharatiya civilization. So that is not going to work, in my opinion. Right? So, in fact, the biggest issue of the Western narrative on Bharat, in my opinion, is that there is no past-present dichotomy. Hindus are present as living in a timeless continuum. Right? The Hindus of 2000 years back practice exactly like what you and me are practicing today. Right? So, in fact, in a way, I'm happy that, right, we are supposed to be following our ancestral tradition. Right? In that context, I feel it is happy. But the way they have written the history is what I call as the James Mill type of history. Right? And that has this narrative as to prove that the Hindus were savage, barbaric, uncivilized, rude people. Right? So this is the underpinning of the narrative. So we need to come out of it and then have our own, as I said before, right, in one of the questions, we need to have our own studies of indigenous culture, what this land had to offer to the world. And I think it is of importance to the entire civilization, because we are the only connection to the primordial. Right? One of the very few surviving civilizations which has been from the time of memorial. Right? So maybe there is something to learn from here. Please.
So, what I want to talk about is that certain narratives they are made as a means of first demonizing traditions and then replacing them with secular or totalitarian norms. And caste narrative is also falling in the same category. And you also assert that it's not about any social reform, but it's more of a civilizational hijacking and disarmament of sorts. So, do you see a parallel between this and the subversion that, let's say, we saw in, Confucianism in China or Orthodoxy in Russia, where, similarly tradition was demonized and then it was replaced by this absolute secular totalitarian norm?
This is a very interesting question, Ji. And if you will permit me, I will just take a step slightly back into look at it more from a global perspective also, right? So, I think the way I see it is the worldview of today is predominantly what you can call it as a post-Renaissance view, right? So, if you see many of the histories and others, what is surprising is that they just talk about the previous times. Like maybe they talk a little bit about Roman, maybe Greek, some inventions that, but pretty much, do we know what the Native Americans culture was, right? And what was the Inca civilization doing? Right? So one can say that, okay, you can take a view, okay, maybe our ancestors, the way it is look like is our ancestors were all secular minded, right, across the globe, right? And somewhere along the way, they started with some beliefs and practices, and now after the post-Renaissance, we are all busy correcting those processes. That is one way of looking at it, right? Then there is another way to say that we are in an evolutionary process and we have more information and knowledge than our ancestors. But both of them are of the assumption that we have actually studied and understood the ancient civilizations with an open mind. But my question there is, did we? Is there an evidence to prove that we have actually studied them? For example, there is a Stonehenges you might have heard in UK, right? Why would people build that Stonehenges? Because some of them weigh a few tons and they moved it a few hundred miles. And then they call them the sarsen stones, the blue stones, all that. Right? And why? What did they do that? And what is their connection? Why did they make it in a connection to the solstices? Right? There is a significance of the solstice to that. Right? Why did they choose to do that? Same thing about Inca civilization I mentioned before. Right? And there is one book I read, and I think I quoted it in one of the speeches also, that the Tibetan monks were supposed to use sound energy to move huge stones uphill. Okay. So, and this is not what we call it, they call it nowadays this WhatsApp university knowledge, right? It is not actually, because there is a Swedish, I think he's a Swedish, if I'm not wrong, he was an aircraft industry person. His name is, I think, Henry Chelson, if I'm not wrong. Okay, so you can check it up. He has actually documented it. So he's an engineer by training, and he has made actually a diagram also how this whole thing happened and how the different frequencies of the drums were used actually. Right? So the point is not to say that, right, let's all go back and then let's build our 3-story, 4-story building in Delhi now using sound instrument, right? Let's all stand together, beat a drum. Right? That's not the point, right? The point is about, have we understood this? How our ancestors were using certain knowledges. Right? And this is not a theoretical study, because especially in the book I have talked about the tantric texts, right, which have been kind of almost completely demonized by the British, saying that these are all barbaric and others. But at least in our indigenous culture, the tantric texts had a very close connection with our traditional medical practices. And a lot of our medical practices are today, I think somebody just shared me a video a few days back. I had to see this, that they say that they talk about the Brahmari pranayama, but they are given an English name to it, right? So this person is talking about that it says it creates a nitric oxide, right? How does it hum? Because they call it a humming thing, right? Sound, it comes with the Brahmari pranayama, right? They say it comes because, not because of any humming, right? Because it is because of the vibrations which happen in the mucous muscles, or the cells, they call it. So we have understood the sound energy, right? We have used, that's why some of our mantras are also Shabda Praman. Right? So there are certain things where we may have to actually study these things with an open mind, because it may be beneficial not just to Bharat, but it may be beneficial to the entire world. And unfortunately, what happens, we have almost 40 million of our manuscripts are not even translated and documented. So that's the unfortunate reality here. And I think because today we all talk about economic man, right? Because economic man or women for the matter, right? That we have to study, we have to make money, our success is all materialistic, but our ancestors were not like that. They also lived, they also tilled the soil, they built a house, they had a family, but they did all of that thinking that they are also part of a community, and they are also part of doing certain things which are also a part of a ritual activities of the community, right? So we have not understood our ancestors, that man or women, we have not studied them deep enough, and we come to a quick judgment on them in this post-Renaissance world. That is my argument in the book.
The humming that you're talking about, I saw it on Brihat's co-founder, Mr. Raghav Krishna's post where he had
Uh-huh.
commented on it. So it was some Westerners, they were talking about it and they were like, oh, this is why you should hum because it increases nitrous oxide in your body, and it dilates your blood vessels and your blood flows more and all that. And he had just written, like, he had made a retweet and he had written, oh, so basically you're talking about Brahmari pranayam.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I have the honor and privilege of knowing Sri Raghav Krishna Garu, right, of Brihat. So he's a wonderful personality. Yes, I'm glad he has also mentioned that. It's very nice of him to do that. Yes.
So, why has caste become a global entry point for all attacks on Hindu Dharma, from academic boycotts to anti conversion laws? and what makes it so potent as a narrative that as I said in the beginning, as an original sin narrative of sorts.
Great. So it's a. I have been thinking about it as well, right? Why is it being made the foundational narrative, right? So one way to look at it is to say that, right, we are one of the very few ancient civilizations which have survived from the time of primordial, right? So then they come up with all this Aryan invasion theory and others. But in other regions, they have not come up with any other, theory like that. Right? And why they are doing it? Because Europe and the rest of the world have been taking all of our knowledge, consuming. Right? No harm in that. Right? But they are doing it in. But they are not giving us. Are they giving us the recognition? Example, maths, linguistics. Right? They're slowly now acknowledging some of the things. Right? But if you talk about India, some of the biggest things, what you'll say yoga, correct? Our gift to the mankind, right? Yoga from India. And then we say Ayurveda. Right? Then we can say maybe what meditation. But these are, I think I saw some economical analysis. See, these are billions of dollars worth of in terms of business size. But can you name at least 4 or 5 companies which are doing big worldwide business in there? Not, I'm not talking about India. I'm talking about worldwide. Are you able to think of any out of your hand? Aditi ji, from your side, you have any? So great, thanks. And I could also, right? I couldn't find also. So I think this is where the issue is coming, right? There is a reason why the attack is happening. I'm just explaining because if Indians, Bharat gets access to our knowledge production systems and how it was produced and how it is to be preserved, right? Then we become an economic powerhouse in this. Thousands of jobs will be created. And we may even be able to solve some of the existing problems in terms of disease progressions or now aging population. All this, we can address some of the problems which are coming to aged people. Right? With better quality of living can be improved. All these things are there in our Ayurveda also. Right? So unless and how would they attack us now? They think, okay, did they have slavery? No, actually, India was one of the big economic powerhouses before. वहाँ पे slavery नहीं था. Right? People were living and they were very sattvic. Right? So how to create a narrative? So the only thing was to bring up a Aryan race that they said there is a foreign race which invaded it. Then they subjugated the local population. Then they created a caste narrative. And then they said, okay, because Aryans came, looted, and created a cam and case system. I have also come. I am looting this place, and I'm also taking all the wealth away, right? So, by the way, I'm also going to civilize you. You guys are barbarians. Indians are barbarians. So that is how the whole architecture was kept, and that became the foundational narrative on that. Did I answer your question there?
Yes, sir. In fact, I would go a step ahead and I would say that, when say if I am back at like 1800s and I want to fight against the Britishers, one of the biggest hurdles would be if someone told me that you yourself who are fighting against me have been an oppressor on the original race of this land for so long. You are as much a foreigner as I am. So you can't fight against me now that I have just replaced you on this land.
Yep, absolutely correct.
Mr. Balaji, you have outlined a 10-step battle plan for countering this casticide. And could you discuss how civilizational decolonization must operate simultaneously on the epistemic, institutional, and emotional fronts? Because all of them have to be aligned together.
Uh, maybe for the benefit of your viewers, since they may not have access to the book now, right? So some of the 10 steps, I won't read through the entire 10, but the first step and the most critical step, in my opinion, is we should stop using the word caste, start using the word Varna Jati. Right? We have Varna Jati system and we have the Varna Ashrama Dharma. Right? The second is we need to create awareness among other dharmics also, because I think awareness creation has to happen, because we are against a very big, well-oiled machine which is heavily resourced, heavily funded. So I think it is only the social media, and I request all the followers of this channel also who are watching this, your viewers, should also take the effort to go and tell their family and friends, and in turn, that is how the propagation happens, right? And so that is thing. And then we have to challenge some of the colonial fake narratives. So some efforts have to be taken on that. And and we need to ensure the family structure is preserved, because there is a big assault happening on that. And the family structure is very, very important, because in the Griha Shastrama is considered the fundamental economic unit for the well-being of the society. Right? And I would request that allocate 30 minutes a week for the battle. This is a civilizational battle, right? And I have explained it in the previous book also, right? Usko matlab hai na to we don't have to chodo all come and then start coming and engaging full day. It is not going to be realistic for everybody. At least nowadays social media is there, right? And then internet is there, phone is there. Please start following some of the dharmic channels. Give them your support, right? 30 minutes a week from our home, right? Doing that, it is a small time for us, but it is a big investment for dharma, right? And the dharma rakshati rakshita, right? So that is another step which is there. And purposeful actions and prayers to Ishvara. So these are some of the steps which I have underlined there, right? Proposed. Now, when we look at this, individual awareness of the issue and active support for dharmic activities, that alone is not going to be sufficient. We need to raise the awareness, right? Because in democracy, what we call is Shankya Shakti, right? And we need to have the numbers. Okay? So which means more and more people are aware of these issues, then usme upar charcha hona chahiye. People may have doubts, right? They may come up and then say, hey, I think I don't understand this point. That healthy dialogue happens, right? Then only the overall understanding will improve, right? And one of the steps which I think we should do is we should ask the Indian government to demand these colonial rulers, right, return all the manuscripts which are taken from us. Because I have seen the Western literature for the last 40, 50 years. 80% of it is based on caste system, caste oppression, caste discrimination, caste hierarchy. Only this, correct? So why do they need because I don't think our 40 million manuscripts or so many million which they have taken from us. I don't know how many of these 40 million is theirs, but whatever they have, they don't seem to be using them to any productive use. And it is a global knowledge. It is not just, it is a humanities treasure. Our Rishi Munis have written. So please give it to us. At least we will make some investment out of it. Right? We should do that. And I actually want to take this opportunity to give you a very good news. Aditi ji, if I may request you, can you show the cover of the book one more time?
Okay,
Please, if you can.
Right? Absolutely.
Please. Thank you, ji. Dhanyawad. So this actually is a symbolic representation of a murti called Paramasati. Okay. And it is living in the part of the eternal Sanatana Dharma tree. That is how this has been visualized. Thank you, Aditi. Thank you. So this Paramasati is actually one of the murtis which was partially destroyed by the colonial rulers, and it was shipped to Europe, in UK, right, rather. Right? So I got some information about that in one of the books and then sent a letter to the Honorable External Affairs Ministry. And just, I think last month, I got an answer back from them saying that they have actually traced the Murti in London. It is in the British Museum. Okay. And it was not in the display. So they have found it somewhere in one of the rooms, maybe, right? Or they have these archives or whatever. They have found it. And so now I have requested them, please let's try to get that Murti back into India. Right? And to give you the significance, these were what they called them in the locally, the British called it as pay coils, meaning pay means it's a demon, right? The demon temples. And in a place called South Travancore, okay, it's part of Kerala, right? It's one of those we call samasthanas in the British period, right? Their own documentation tells me that close to 20,000 such murtis or temples were destroyed by the British. So now all our viewers, my humble request, Sanatana Dharma and the so-called Brahminism, whatever they call it, has existed with these practices for thousands of years peacefully. It is actually the British who has come and destroyed like 20,000 of these temples, calling them as demonolatory, right? But somehow the Sanatana Dharma is being blamed for being non-egalitarian, being intolerant, and others. So we need to understand some of this history so that our youngsters can go and successfully argue back against some of these fake narratives. Again, so I want to thank the External Affairs Ministry here because I think it's very nice of them to have gone and found it. And Ishwar Kripa, we will get our Parmashakti back into India very soon.
In fact, so when we talk about the British, I mean, one, of course, is the side where they absolutely demonized Hinduism, and there were obviously attempts at conversion and the propagation of Christianity. I was interestingly reading this book by this author, Mrs. Deepa Mandle, and she's written beautifully about 7 temples that she felt very connected to. And one of the key points that I am reminded of here is there's this temple called the Brihadishwara temple at Gangaikonda, Cholapur, and she tells us that historically the Britishers just needed granite stones to build a dam, and because they felt that it would be too burdensome to and financially burdensome as well to carry these stones all the way across, all they did was they took out granite stones from the temple's architecture and they used it in the dam directly. So this is how little the Britishers seem to care about the legacy and the belief system of the country that they were ruling. That they valued it well less enough to demonize it. Yes, to use the architecture just like the Islamic rulers perhaps before us, before them, used it in their religious structures after breaking our temples. They used it in a similar way, albeit for perhaps non-religious purposes.
Interesting. Interesting. Maybe I think
So,
I will try to read that book as well because this temple is something which is very significant and big temple in Tamil Nadu.
yeah.
Please.
So you've talked about the 10 steps that you highlight. I'll take it forward in that direction. When Indic thinkers today think of reframing the caste debates, as we call them, how do we do that without walking into traps of denialism or defensiveness or utilitarianism? And what vocabulary do we need to replace the current matrix with?
Oh, I think first we need to take control of our civilizational narrative, right? Not leave it for Westerners to interpret it because, like, what China has done is they have taken complete control of their civilizational narrative. That is number one. Second is, as I said, we must invest in civilizational studies by our own scholars. Right? Our dharmacharyas and our traditional scholars should be consulted on interpretation of our sacred scriptures. Right? So I don't understand why some Western scholar, right? When I mean Western, I don't necessarily mean that he's a Western by birth, right? Maybe somebody who's trained, Indian who's trained in the Western methodology also, right? I use the methodology. They just because they have learned the Sanskrit English, like a language, right? Like English language. How did they get the expertise to interpret our sacred religious text? Right? Who is vouching for the authenticity of those translations? So these are questions which because why are we leaving that control to not within India, right? We need to have it within India. But I have written about it in the book also. I think Aditi ji, you may be aware, right? How some of them have actually said that, right? Oh, we have kind of taken over the Sanskrit in such a way that we have made it into something which is not natural to the language. We have made it into cataloging, philologizing, all these functions because they feel that they will be in competition with the traditional scholars. So they have said that very openly in one of the speeches. They have talked about it. Okay. Now, coming back into the caste, right? I think one thing which should happen is if there are personal or anecdotes or people come up with their personal experience, we must not try to defend or deny them. Right? We must accept personal anecdotes with respect because the person has had a lived experience on that. Right? But at the same time, that's an anecdote. We need to look at the institution. So I have actually proposed 12 questions and I will be sharing it in our Twitter handle, and I can share it with you also, Aditi ji, maybe. If there is a way you can put this out in the screen here. Definition of caste system. Is there agreed legal sociological definition of caste system? Hai? Na hai. Right? We don't know. Right? I'm asking. I'm posing the question. Is there any answer? Is caste equal to varna, or is it equal to jati, or is it something else, or is it a combination of both? What is the unique feature of the Indian caste system when compared to social division in other society? Because I have actually talked about other societies also, right, where the social divisions existed. Right? The idea is not to justify saying that wahan pe bhi wo hai, so yahan pe bhi. Not that. Right? But what is distinct and unique feature of Indian caste system? What are the properties of the caste system? Was it uniform across India? And when and where did this system actually originate? Right? Does it have an origin? Or did it start simultaneously across the entire geography of India? Right? Like we had that during Corona time, right? Our Prime Minister said we will have a lockdown, right? Suddenly 40 days, the whole country went for a lockdown. Like that, did we have a lockdown and then said, okay, we are now, from tomorrow, we are going to have a caste system across all India, right? Or did it begin in one place or did it go into other regions? Right? See, if it started simultaneously, what was the mechanism by which they accomplished such a fate, right? Because even in Bharat, even when we had that shutdown also, a lot of people had issues, right? They couldn't immediately start. It had to be enforced with a huge police mechanism. So much of communication has to be done in our time. In the ancient geography, how did they manage that, right? But if it didn't begin in one place, right, and then it started spreading, there has to be some reason for it to spread. Right? If I belong to a to a varna where I am not supposed to be at a higher scale, they call it higher lower, right? But to my mind, there is nothing like higher lower. Everybody is equal. Right, that is how our dharma was. But the so-called lower, as they claim it, right? Why would, if I belong to them, why would I go and accept this system? And the majority of the population was supposed to have been treated that way. Why would the majority silently ask, yahan pe bhi aa raha hai, right? Let's use this system here. And across kingdoms, people were voluntarily going and adapting to this. And what is the reason for it? Right? And some of the scholars, if you go and read, it is very interesting. They actually tell you that maybe, since I asked the question, but I will also give you a special answer to our viewers and to both of you. One author has said that actually Brahmins are masters in Atharva Veda. Right, so they kind of created a hypnosis, right? That right, they actually had the power, right? And then they could claim supernatural powers. And my question is then, if somebody claims supernatural power, what will you do? Right? You will immediately ask, Manu, please show it to me, demonstrate it, right? Because, right? It's a normal question. Maybe once or twice, but throughout for 700, 800 years, where they're doing it. And this is supposed to be scholarship, okay? So I know you both are having a good laugh about it, but this is how they've explained it. Okay? Why would a vast majority of the population accept it and continue to subscribe, right? Which gives them an inferior status just because one minority community decided, right? That they decided that they will do it. Right? Maybe three of us tomorrow can say that, right? Okay, now we become the rulers of India, something like that, right? Can we do that? We cannot, right? We are a democracy, we are a constitution, we have elected people, and we have a system which is going, right? Just three of us just cannot decide something on our own. How was this institution of caste enforced and sustained over thousands of years? Given that Brahmins did not have political or economical clout to create institutional mechanisms to impose, enforce, or sustain such a system, right? We have a wonderful democracy today, right? And how much does it take to enforce institution, right? We have a great legal institution, we have police institutions, we have central, we have state governments, all of them work together, and then they have their own meetings regularly. Sometimes the chief ministers go to the center, and then the central ministers, they sit together, how to do the taxation systems. So many things happen through institutional mechanisms, right? It's not like, okay, we are a democracy, okay, in that's all, everything happens by magic. It doesn't. So much of institutions have been created, so many brilliant minds have worked on it, so much of enforcement happens, and we can be proud. We are one of the biggest democracy. We are the biggest democracy in the world. Right? And every 5 years when we see the election process happening, right? But people can say a lot of cynical things about it, but it's one of the biggest exercises of democracy in human history. Right? You can see all these people, election people taking sincerely boxes and then going through small rivers, carrying things in remote mountain places, and then keeping a ballot box there, and then getting people to exercise their constitutional right. We can be proud of that. But coming back to the point, right? How was this kind of institution of caste enforced without any mechanism, without anything like that? Was there an institution? Who enforced it?
I think the argument more often than not when we talk about history, at this juncture, it turns to this popular belief that, the Brahmins wielded power in terms of their influence on the ruling class at the time. That if they tell something to the king, perhaps, then the king has to listen to it and he has to take his advice even on legal matters, even on matters of creating law and enforcing it.
So it's a interesting point, but there is absolutely no evidence on that. You know that, correct? So this is now I'll ask you one logical question there, right? Supposing there are two kingdoms, kingdom A, kingdom B. Kingdom A and B choose to fight, and as per their tradition of history, they say there is a lot of fights were happening, right, between kingdoms. So kingdom A wins. Right? So the king of kingdom A who has won, how is he going to treat the Brahmanas of kingdom B? Because as per the theory that these were the people who were controlling all this, these people the people who were the bad guys, right? So wouldn't he have eliminated all of them, or at least banished all of them? Right? Because it sounds like, there is this, I don't know if you've seen all these movies called Godfather kind of movie, right? Mafia, right? They make it look like then they will say this is all, they make it look like a mafia was running, right? An invisible mafia, right? Uh, so isn't it a logical question, Aditya ji, right? Any king will do that, right? Because these Brahmanas were the one who instigated against that king against me. Now these Brahmanas have to be dealt with, otherwise they will create trouble for me.
True.
So these were the questions. So I will happily share it. And so we need to ask these questions, not so much because of argument's sake, right? The idea is not to argue or to prove a point. The idea is the chacha hona chahiye us par, right? That everybody has to contribute to it. Maybe there are some questions where we can have a logical answer also, right? I'm not denying that. But has the discussion ever happened? Instead of assuming that something happened there, we need to kind of probe that. That is the whole point behind it. Sorry, please, let me stop here. Please go ahead.
Mr. Balaji, so you'll be aware that there are like a lot of Hindu activists that we have, and there are a lot of intellectuals that we have who've taken it upon themselves to judge the right from the wrong. So, what is your view on the effectiveness or the lack thereof of the current Hindu activists and their intellectual circles in addressing this issue with the clarity and aggression that it demands? Are we still too timid or are we too reactive when it comes to dealing with it?
I think the caste narrative, in my opinion, the caste narrative main aim is to peddle oppressed narrative. Right? So that's fake narrative. So anyone challenging this myth, immediately they can call them as oppressor. Right? Or even sometimes they may even call them as Brahminical. Right? So supposing, say, Aditya ji, if I call you Brahminical, right? So how can you prove that you are not Brahminical? That I have not even seen a proper definition of what is Brahminical. Right? So unless we challenge, right, as I said, right, because so this is how this whole thing, Aditi ji, coming back to your point. So they actually put people on the what we call as a guilt tripping the people, right? That hey, you're supposed to be guilty already, right? And why are you even opening your mouth, right? You're supposed to be guilty already, right? So unless we go back and then start looking at the root, which is the division of the population based on race, Aryan theory. Right? Second is the Aryans oppressed. Then there was a caste system. Right? Then there was a denial of opportunities in education and others. Right? So then there is a attack on the Hindu scriptures. So these are the 5 or 6 pillars. The sixth pillar becomes now the eco pillar. Now they say Hinduism practices are not eco-friendly. So, right, you have seen the Diwali, right? I think you are all, some of you are based in Delhi will know, right? The impact Diwali has on the pollution. Supposed to have impact, right? One day of firecrackers, right? So, I like that. And then most of our ritual practices are either water-based or Agni-based, right? Or Prithvi-based, right? Panchabutas, right? So, then they start questioning the ecological friendliness of this. Right? So if you see it, that is why I have gone to the court on the Aryan theory. And now they have accepted there is no such thing like an Aryan race. Right? Your viewers may be aware that I have actually fought that case, and then I myself was able to argue. The Honorable Court permitted me to make my own argument there. So we have now an official confirmation that there is no Aryan race, there is no Aryan invasion. So it is there. Now that means that now Aryans oppressed the others becomes a difficult point now, right? Why did first three Varnas gang up against the fourth Varna? That's what the theory is, right? The first three Varnas colluded, they made a gang and then they oppressed the others. The reason they gave was they were different race. Now we have proved there is no race difference. So now up ulta bhi push sakte hai na? Like now you can say Varna 3 and 4. As per them they are 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Let's say Varna of Vaishyas and Shudras, they become the economical and numerical power, right? They are the real power, land holding power. This they could have joined hands together and then suppressed the other two. Why did they not do it? Or if only one Varna has to be suppressed, the only person who was economically not having any higher status, who was not having political power also, right, and not having military power also is Brahman. So other three should have actually ganged up and then attacked the Brahmana Varna. Correct? So these questions have to happen. Right? And because the race, that is why they know these questions will come. That's why they fitted in the Aryan theory nicely to say that the indigenous people were suppressed by the other three. The other three belong to one. Right? Now that we have kind of challenged that, right? Now we need to challenge the next pillars. Sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely, I agree. So, I mean, we read about the Brahmin institutions at the time. I mean, the biggest service to Indian education, perhaps, is the Gurukul system. I mean, we cannot even deny the kind of impact that it has had on the Indian mind at that point of time. And we see that Brahmins at that time who used to perhaps teach in those institutions used to sustain themselves on what the parents of most of these students would give them out of their willingness instead of a hard fees that they would charge to these people. So, I mean, with zero economical power at their disposal, how do you even make that argument? I absolutely agree. It brings me to one of the deeper questions rather, because being from Sanatan is more than just being material or just looking after yourself in terms of your body perhaps. uh, do you believe that casticide is ultimately a symptom of spiritual deracination, and that the loss of Atmabodh and Swadharma have made Hindus sort of vulnerable to these external narratives?
That's a great question. I think what has happened is, unlike the invasions, physical invasions where thousands and in fact millions might have death, our ancestors have sacrificed their lives. I feel the casticide is an attempt to destroy the roots of our civilization. And how does it do it? It tries to do it, right, by dividing and fracturing the Hindu society along caste lines. It unleashes a malicious anti-Hindu fake narrative. Okay? And what it tries to do is it tries to install self-hatred among Hindus. Okay? Because any person, right, even if it's, I think there is like, if I have 1 minute, I can explain that. Right? I think I explained it in the, thank you, right? I explained it in the Brahmin genocide book. See, there are two small children sitting next to each other. Right? You give them one chocolate each. Right? They both are happy. But you give one child 2 chocolates. but you give the other child 4 chocolates. Immediately the one which got 1, it was happy with 1, right? Now if you give 2, but the other one got 4, it is going to be immediately unhappy. Right? I think it is one of the psychological experiments I think I quoted there, because by nature we uh, we are against discrimination. Right? We want equality. Don't want to be discriminated against. Right? It is a fundamental human quality. Right? So having said that, so when there is a narrative put out there that, right, we have been a fundamentally discriminatory society, fundamentally hierarchical society, we are non-egalitarian, all this, so it installs self-hatred among Hindus. "Itna hi hua." Oh, right, so much, we have so much of baggage in the past. Right? So we don't access our ancestral wisdom, we don't access our ancestral knowledge. We in effect, we stop, in a way, we actually reject and disown our ancestors. Right? And we stop practicing our Swadharma, coming back to a point. Right? So that is the objective of this casticide. Right? Every individual, family, and home and forum, we must confront the caste system's fabricated narrative. Choice nahi hai hamara paas, because its deeply ingrained character is eroding the basic fabric of our Sanatana Dharma. Right? We need to recognize the significant harm which we cause by kind of normalizing this caste system narrative as a factual narrative of our civilization. So we should stop viewing the civilization from this kind of alien lens, and we should start looking at it from our local, what we call as Bharatiya Drishti. Sorry, did I answer your question there?
Absolutely.
So, sir, to look at it from the Bharatiya Drishti, I think the first and foremost thing will be to placing Dharma at the center of our civilizational revival. So, coming on to that, how do you envision a post-casteicide Hindu society, where one as Swabhav-based function or a completely non-categorized social body?
That's an interesting question, Ji. The way I see it is the Varna Jati system time period, right, before the invasions, it coincided with India having massive wealth. And massive wealth happened in many civilizations also, right? But prehistorically. But after a certain point of time, massive wealth happened, I think after maybe what 10th century onwards, it coincided with invasions, it coincided with slave labor, because many empires were built with that. Right after, I think, 8th or 10th century, you see, right, we had those empires built with that loot, right, looted money. They built empires like that. But ancient civilizations like Bharat, they were wealthy with their own system, economic system. So something was right with that. Right? So we need to go back and study what was this unique system, right? So going back to the unique system concept, I don't see our unique system was discriminatory. I would rather say, let's have an unbiased lens, find out what was going right with our civilization. Right? I haven't seen much studies on that. So I think we need to invest our time and effort to having our own indigenous jati studies. Please.
So, this is a sort of a personal question. You can choose not to answer it as well. But I ask it in the interest of many people my age, because when I talk to them, they perhaps would talk to me freely because I am their age and I am their friend. But when it comes to talking in a public sense, they would then also chew up their words because they would feel that that would make them sort of unpopular, or it would, just not fit in with the image that they want to sort of have. You chose anonymity initially. Was that due to the intellectual climate, uh, or was it for personal safety, strategic messaging, or is it because of the corporate past that you come from? Uh, if that is not a very personal question.
Sure. So when you say anonymity, are you referring to the name Asi? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Is that you're referring to that, right? Okay. So Asi continues to be my pen name. Okay. And I think in the first book of Brahmin Genocide, I might have explained that. So the reason to choose that name was that Asi is the civilizational sword of Sanatan Dharma. Right? It comes to us from in Mahabharata, Bhishma Pitamaha explains to Nakul about the primordial weapon, right? It is the what we can call as the mother of all weapons. Okay? So, and as per it is now with Kripacharya, and it is supposed to have been hidden somewhere, and Ashwatthama is supposed to get it. That is supposed to be the end of Kali Yuga, by the way. Right? So, this sword, right? So, the spirit of this sword is lying in all of us, right? All Bharatiyas, right? We are all from the legacy of our ancestors, right? So, the idea of taking that name was that asitwa, if we can call that, right, has to be recognized in all of us, and we are all one together, right? All Bharatiyas are one together. We are all shared our ancestry with Asi, right? We are all proud inheritors of this civilization. So I took that name. So nothing anonymous about it. The other thing was also that there was a period where, as per our dharma, right, we are not supposed to do a lot of right, what do I call it? Self-advertisement, because the cost is more important than the person, we call it, to put it simply, right? So in a way, the cost was put more, but then I realized that in today's world and age and time, right, people would like to see a face behind, right, and then would like to talk to it. So now it is becoming more and more. So that is the only reason. Apart from that, no other reason. Did I clarify that?
Yes.
So all of us are part of the sea anyway. Great.
So, Mr. Balaji, if you were addressing a room full of so-called elite Hindu youth at any primary educational premier educational institute, how would you deprogram them from the caste guilt and inject this civilizational confidence? Because we often see a lot of these youngsters, they're very misguided. Like they come from this space, oh, like they come from this automatic space that, oh, you know what, we've done wrong, our ancestors have done wrong, and we are here to like set the course right. And in that process, they get entangled in this emotional manipulation and they get misguided altogether from their dharmic paths.
I'm glad you asked that question, Ji. Thanks. So I think the way to look at it, I would request all the youngsters that today, our youngsters, many of them whom I have spoken to, they don't want to accept any word at face value, right? But it doesn't matter to them who speaks it, or what is that. They want to actually go and find out using primary sources. They all have their phones, and within seconds they can find information. Right? So they should use that strength of them, right? Which is their strength. The questioning, they want to question things and then understand. First is please go and find out. I would tell them, right, that first please go and find out what the census commissioners have written. I talked about Ibbotson, right? I think you said his name is Denzel Ibbotson, right? Our Punjab commissioner we spoke about. I'll give you one more, E.A. Gate, right? He was the census commissioner of, I think, 1911. And he says, you know what, this caste looks fixed but immutable, but it is not. Actually, he called it, it's like the hour hand of the clock, watch, because it does not look like moving, but it is moving. Right? Same way, the process is changing is slow, right? But it is definitely moving, because what happens is when one section of a caste develops any peculiarity, right? Say they go for a different occupation, they go for a different habitat, meaning they go to another region, they go to have a different social practice. क्या होता है that after some time they think, hey, we are different, from the main caste, right? Then they say, okay, I use the word caste, my apologies, right? But I think it is a jati, right? So for the easy understanding of the viewers, I use the word caste. Then the feeling goes from something. Then immediately what happens at some point they say, they withdraw themselves from the main caste in terms of marriage alliances. Then they form their own separate subcaste, right? Then they say now a new caste is born out of nowhere, right? After some time. So he says that this is how the caste is. It is so mutating, right? That it is steady, but you can never fix it. But then there are some social scientists who today claim that they have read a few books on caste and then they have become experts. So do you want to believe them, or do you want to believe the census commissioners who were on the ground and who had no interest to actually give any positive view? Right? They would have given only a realistic view. Right? So the second thing I would tell them is the Varna Jati system coincided with the biggest wealth with Bharat had. Right? So now when you refer to India of today and then say, right, please think about it. $45 trillion is supposed to have been looted from our country. So to give you a perspective, I will tell them that if you belong to a family of 4, example, in today's term, that means each family like that, like yours, should have got 1 crore approximately. That's the amount of money which has been looted. You are all crorepathies. Now, the people who took away all that money told us that we are now what is third world. But I never heard, I don't know what is the second world also. Right? Please go and find out where we were. If we were third world countries, what were they coming and doing here for 200 years? So this is the second question I will ask them. And finally, I would say if we adopt the caste system narrative, that means in a way we are allowing our civilization and our ancestors to be branded as non-egalitarian, discriminatory. Do we want to accept that? Do we want, or did our ancestors ever say that theirs is the only true path? Did they say that? Have you ever come across any such text which says that? Did our ancestors ever differentiated between believers and non-believers, saying that if you believe, it's going to happen to you, if you don't believe, this is going to happen to you, in terms of negative things, that they distinguish different privileges? Now, this is fourth final question, right? They left us a treasure of manuscripts, but today we are so involved with the Western model that we don't even have time to go and read all of this. But then we somehow decide that we will read 2-3 Western authors, and then when I say Western, not again Western origin, but the Western framework, and then we decide that okay, we are going to disown our ancestors. But by disowning, we are also doing this. We are subscribing to a James Bell narrative, which is, I'll repeat it for you word by word. A Hindu appears to be limited to mere animal functions, and even in them, indifferent. Their proficiency and skill in the several lines of occupation to which they are limited are little more than dexterity which any animal with similar conformation, but which has no higher intellect than that of a dog, an elephant, or a monkey might be supposedly capable of attaining. This is from a person called Marquis of Hastings. Yes, said. So this has been the foundational narrative about Bharatiya civilization. And do we want that tag to be given to our civilization? So please, I will ask them. Now we as our generation, you have to make a decision now. If we remain silent, then accept this. Then that means we are silent means that we are accepting that framework. Okay? And lack of action when we are facing evil is also meaning that, right, we are kind of, in a way, we are supporting that evil. That is what it becomes. Right? So we must challenge these narratives. We must question them. Right? Please do that. That is what my argument will be. You know, you are youngsters, so does that argument resonate with you? Let me ask you. Sorry, I'm putting you on a spot, but sorry.
It does. Yes, Aditi.
Aditi doesn't want to comment anything, so she has just given only a smile. She wants the viewers to decide. Correct? Agreed.
No, it does resonate. It does resonate on so many levels. Sure.
So finally, coming to our final question, and this is an exciting one as a reader. What's next after Casticide? Are there thematic expansions or any new projects that you've sort of taken on?
I think when the Brahmin genocide book came about, right, I think I have to explain the history there, which is, I think I'll just speed it up because I was doing some research in the villages and others. Then I wanted to actually do something for the community, for our Hindu Bharatiya society as such. Then some Kankaryakartas said, why don't we just put all this together into a book? Right. So Brahmin genocide book came, and in the book launch, one of the book launches, somebody asked actually, are you going to write a next book? I said, I don't see myself as a writer. I'm more of an accidental writer. But after the Brahmin genocide book came, many parents were starting to contact me, especially parents from foreign countries. And the problem was like what you all explained, right? That self-hatred, caste as a primary narrative of Hindus, and that they are doing their own bit, like taking them to music class, to all their Vedanta class, or maybe a Bhagavatam class, or I think Balvika. So many other options are there for them, right? So they put them into some of those things. They do cultural trainings, but they are not able to address some of the questions. So I started also explaining some of the clarifications, and like many youngsters, they also wanted documentation. Right? The youngsters don't want to take, can you please show me where is the proof? Right? So I started giving all that. Then the parents said, why don't, some of the parents actually said, you're putting so much of effort, why don't you put this together into a book? And this time they requested, please give all the primary sources, because we want to explain to our children also. So maybe Aditi, when you read the book, you might have seen a lot of references I would have actually quoted firsthand, because this is an aid to the parents also. In a way, I'm trying to help the parents so that they also can use this book to have a dialogue with their children. So that is how the whole progression has been. So Ishvara, it is all Ishvara as guidance. So there is nothing which has been planned by our side, right? We are just we are just the implementers of Ishvara's will. But one thing which has happened is, after the Aryan case has happened, right? So I am looking at some more engagement with the government. So our primary view is, we will first engage with the government, right? There is a Brahmin protection petition which has been there. So trying to get, no, it's not just for Brahmins, because what happens is, this is a hate speech template, right? The moment today Brahmins are being attacked because it is a colonial legacy. Right? And the moment they succeed with that, then they will say the next community which they want to target, they will say this community is having Brahminical practice. Right? Then the entire hate template they will use on this. So it is a way to divide and again rule the Samaj and to completely destroy our civilization. So it is not just a petition for some privilege for Brahmins or something like that. And there is a complete FAQ also, right? Saying in the website, there is a website, maybe Aditi ji, I can give you the website. It's called brahmingenocide.org or saptarishi.org. We have explained the petition. Some questions viewers will have, right? So I am a Brahmin, why should I care about it? Or I'm not a Brahmin, why should I care about it, right? This petition. So why is it relevant to them? And it takes we explain all that with the FAQ. It is in 5 languages. Maybe if our viewers can take time to support the petition, because we are taking it as a representation to the government. So that is one. And the second thing is also about creating our own institutional mechanisms for studies, which I think explained 2-3 times here. I'm trying to take it off with the government also to have an engagement. Maybe Ishvara will guide us there.
I know I said that was the last question. I have a very personal question for you, because I think that would resonate a lot with me. You used to have a corporate career, if I'm right?
Correct.
So when you step into this role as, as a sort of I would say an educator more than anything else, is it more liberating perhaps, or do you feel like tied down, in not in a negative sense as we would say for a corporate world perhaps, but with a sense of purpose? Or is it both? I don't know. Could you describe that to me?
It's a interesting question, Ji. The way I see it is, corporate was a different world, right? So a lot of that is based on Western frameworks and others. But because we come from a family of Agni Gotris, so I did have some initial training on our Bharatiya Samskaras and our sacred scriptures. So in a way, it was more like, I would say, what? There is a certain role you perform for certain benefits. Obviously, there is a lot of monetary benefits which come along with a corporate career as well, right? So economic prosperity and others come with that. So you perform that role. But this one is more, I would say, this is more towards the next generations, right? Because this is also creating prosperity. Because I'll give you one analogy which I think the Kanchi Mahashankaracharya used to say, and I will close with that. He used to say that today all of us are having a successful life, maybe a happy life. It's relative, right? So we cannot say, but it is all what we have today is the blessings of our ancestors, because they have done all the dharma, right? And we are reaping the benefits of it. Right? And he used to call it as a cycle pedal, right? So our ancestors have been pedaling so fast for so many generations. Now, even though we are not pedaling, the cycle is still going to move, right? For maybe one generation, it will move. For 2 generations, it will move. For 3 generations, it will move. But eventually, it will stop. Now, we need to take the responsibility to pedal. So it is for the future generations. So that is the significance of why we have to do certain things for our dharma. So that is what is the cycle pedal. So I am trying to do my little bit for the pedaling so that the future generations are able to get it. Did I answer your
So
question?
much, sir. Absolutely. It has been a pleasure to talk to you, and this episode was very different from the others in a lot of ways because not only did we obviously talk about a very important topic that we are often, as Hindus, sort of either ashamed to talk about or we're targeted about it and then we don't know what to say at all and we sort of freeze. So it was an absolute pleasure to talk about that and many more things. I mean, whether it be about the structure of our dharma itself in terms of our spiritual seeking, and to hear about you about your experience itself. That is very enriching. So I thank you so much for being here today with us and for sparing us so much of your time. I know we've taken up a lot of your time as well. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for our listeners as well for tuning in and for listening so patiently to us and to Sir and his important message. Uh, we, both Aditi and I, would strongly urge that you read both the books that Sir has written and that you do your own additional reading in terms of the primary sources that Sir has not only quoted but also talked about in this interview. There are a lot of interesting books that you can read about the downgrading of Indian institutions, the indigenous institutions that we've had for the propagation of our cultural, dharmic knowledge. A good book to start with would perhaps also be Dr. Minakshi Jain's book about the educational institutions down to, and of course, coming back to Sir's book, uh, it would be a very important addition to your knowledge base about the caste system and about a lot of other aspects, but mainly about the caste system because that is something that we are faced with every day as Hindus. So thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you so much again, sir, for being here with us today and for giving us so much of your time.
Thank you, Aditi Joshi ji. Thank you, Aditya ji, and thank you to all your viewers. Just I will add, the book is about not about caste system; it is about caste system myth. Right. So all of you, please always keep calling it as caste system myth from now onwards,
Right.
and prayers to Ishvara for all your well-being. Ram Ramji.
Listen.
Thank you.